I was a cop, and now I'm a cop writer. And now I'm in the position that really, yeah, I want to try and move on, and I want to be a writer. I think a good deal about that. And I want to write crime fiction novels that are going to challenge people's assumptions, that make people reconsider their views on police and police in America. It's been a tough year for cops. It really has. You can talk about Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. You talk about Eric Gardner in Staten Island. That straight up murder by a police officer down in South Carolina. And then there was that cop who just lost his mind on that young lady in a bathing suit down in Texas. And I know it's been hard for people to watch that and not have their views impacted about how they see police. You watch that, you form an opinion over those sorts of isolated events when we all know that there are hundreds of thousands of contacts between police and citizens that go off every day without a hitch. But it's still hard not to zero in on those sorts of occurrences. But I think what I want you to what I want you to think about is maybe something a little bit different and something that's just a little bit more, I don't know, common. I mean, imagine it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're home, asleep next to your spouse. Your kids are down at the end of the hall, tucked in, asleep. And you hear the sound of shattering glass in your front door. And now someone's walking around in your living room. And you're the kind of person who just never thought you'd need a gun. So all you have is a phone. And I can tell you, you're going to forget all about those videos. And you're going to forget about what you've been reading in the New York Times and what you've been watching on CNN. And you're going to pick up that phone, and you're going to dial 911, and you're going to say, send me the biggest, baddest, most hard-knocking cop you got. Because somebody's broken into my house, and they're coming up my stairs. That call plays out across this country thousands of times a week. And the truth of the matter is, more often than not, it's something akin to the raccoon knocking over the trash can. And everybody just dusts themselves off and feels a little bit embarrassed. But it's not at all uncommon that it's the real deal. And in almost every case, the police officers across this country that show up to deal with that call do it with professionalism, with courage, with bravery, and really with a great deal of restraint. And I think that dealing with that sort of situation or trying to see something through that sort of reality, that those calls that come in are almost always handled appropriately. When things do go badly, it can really be for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's just bad luck. Things go poorly. Oftentimes it is poor training. It can be terrible tactics. It can be incompetence. But what it almost never is malicious intent by a police officer. That's the rarest of all things. And yet, that is the projection that we see in today's society. There's a line between holding someone accountable and vilifying a profession. And I decided to take that subject on. And I took it on in benefit of the doubt. I didn't want to shy away from it. I didn't want to shy away from the hard subject matter. And really what that comes down to is this whole issue of violence. And see, I want to say that because I want people to know that benefit of the doubt is adult fiction. And a writer that I enjoy a great deal, his name's James Carlos Blake. And he was quoted as saying that violence is the most elemental truth of life. And think about that. Violence is the most elemental truth of life. Now, I don't know that I believe that. I don't even know that I agree with that. That statement's far out there. But I noticed that he didn't say camaraderie. I noticed that he didn't say friendship or love. He said violence. And I think what Blake was trying to say is that there's a violent underpinning, undercoating in all of us. Every one of us. It's right there underneath the skin. Right up against the bone. What makes it bump up? What makes people act out on it? That's what's different in each one of us. And of course, those of us in this room see ourselves as quite sophisticated, for sure. But there are other people in this world where it doesn't take anything more than the wrong look. or maybe an empty pocket that they want to fill up with somebody else's cash, or maybe just that insatiable desire to be violent, to feel powerful in a life that is otherwise without power. There's something in all of us. What motivates us to act on it is what's different. And it doesn't matter if you're a cop or you're a writer or a lawyer or a teacher, stay-home mom or dad. There is that line you've drawn. You've drawn it in the sand of your soul, if you will. And there's something that would make you cross it. I think that dealing with that issue and looking at it realistically and looking at what makes a good cop go bad, or what makes young men act out violently in their communities, or what leads some people to kill people that they love. Those are all interesting subjects to take on in this never-ending issue of crime and violence in America. I've mentioned my dad a few times, and in all this talk about crime and crime fiction and what the challenges are and the assumptions, and wanting to have a voice in that social commentary, the seeming never-ending social commentary of criminal justice. That's something that I really want to explore. And I recognize that that's something that to some people is again, not the kind of book they want to read. But I think it's important fiction, or I think it can be. And I want to have a voice in that sort of commentary. And I would encourage you all to continue to look for your voice, to find what it is, what story it is you have to tell, and that story that you think other people could learn from and want to hear. And I do think a lot of that comes from the influence of my father. And again, having now talked about this long, winding journey of my own, I want to think back a little bit about my dad, because again, violence, police work. My dad was a pacifist. He was a philosophy professor and he was a pacifist, and he was more than a little concerned when his son decided to join the Marines and then after that be a cop. But he was always very supportive. But he passed a few years ago, and I had the honor of being with him in his last few hours. And one of the things he asked to do was to dictate a letter, for me to take down a letter for his children and for his grandchildren. And I did it, and it was so appropriate. One of the things that he said that was just so typical of my dad, in closing the letter, he said, "Always be kind and do your best to be wise." I've thought a lot about that. And I think what Dad was trying to say is, it shouldn't be hard for us to be good to one another. It shouldn't be hard for us to be kind, to be decent. Wisdom, that takes work. That takes something every day. Approaching life with wisdom and sophistication, and looking at the issues in a way that moves the problem towards solution. I think those are the things that take work. I would imagine that my dad would be glad to know that I shared that with you. And I think he'd be happy to know that that his son, as I said in this book, I dedicated it to him, and it was my hope that were he here, it would have made him proud. So I'll leave you with that, the words of my father: always be kind, do your best to be wise, and thank you for an opportunity to be here today, and the best of luck in your continuing journey.